Gya says, welcome to Greek Like Me, the podcast about all things Greek. I'm your host, Pamela Diotis Wood. Email us at stealthgreek@gmail.com to share comments, questions, and stories about anything and everything Greek. Christos Anesti. Today we're joined by Aaron Poochigian, an award-winning poet, classical scholar, and translator of ancient texts, to talk about his new translation of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. This acclaimed Roman emperor was educated in Greek and hero worshipped the Stoic philosophers of ancient Greece to the point of dedicating the rest of his life to following their teachings. Meditations is a guide to living that still resonates 1,800 years later. Proof is the 100,000 copies sold in 2019 alone. Poochigian's fresh, relatable translation is ripe for these outrageous times that we're living in, and readers trying to desperately navigate them and find some peace of mind. The cultural and historical context is the icing on the cake. You had also said that some people complained it was repetitive.
Yeah, I see it as the book as being like music, like a symphony, with theme and variation, because he doesn't repeat himself word for word ever. He's always recombining whatever he's repeating with other new things. I don't find the book repetitive at all.
Tell me what it is that pulled you in and made you want to create a new translation.
Oh, there's a whole story behind that, and it's not a big secret. I'll just tell. During COVID, I became a drug addict. I became a cocaine addict. And when I was pulling out of it, I looked for new types of meditation that would soothe my mind as I was going through withdrawals and recovery. And one was Shinrin Yoku, Japanese forest bathing. I got a book out of that, 4 Walks in Central Park. And the other was rereading Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. And it really struck me when I read it in my late 40s. When I read it in my early 20s, I was too young to appreciate it. I didn't understand it, and I had prejudices against it. But when I reread it in my late 40s, it gave me, yes, everything I needed. And in terms of letting me know that my happiness is dependent on me. I like that. That's a big message in Stoicism, that you are fully responsible for your own happiness.
That is huge. He wanted to be a Stoic philosopher, you said, as a young man, as a
Yes,
child
a
even.
full-time philosopher. He wanted to be a full-time philosopher, but he only got minutes, as I understand it, here and there, perhaps at the beginning of the day and at the end, because he was so scrupulously responsible. He was the perfect emperor. I couldn't criticize him for anything. But the whole time, he would rather have been free just to be a philosopher. And there are some sections about that as well.
I guess that's what made him such a good emperor, is that he was so thoughtful that the most important thing was ethics and your treatment of others and your what you were giving to the Commonwealth, the entirety of the cosmos and of humankind.
Yes. I am, yes, impressed with him as an emperor and as a human being. He is so earnest. Early on in book 1, entry 16, Marcus praises the previous emperor Antoninus Pius for showing him, Marcus, what the royal court could be like, right? That it could be a place where the emperor lives as just another citizen, a humble, and doesn't dress in any special way, doesn't wear the imperial purple robe, right? But also doesn't lose any respect from people. And so, yes, given that Marcus was the most powerful person in the world at the time he was writing, his emphasis on humility, it's a major theme in the work, and it seems he did try to practice that in life, as well as, though he was, as I said, an autocrat, he had absolute power. In the section in which he praises Antoninus Pius, he insists on respecting the rights and the freedoms of his citizens. And so sometimes Marcus is portrayed as the philosopher king. It's a character that comes out of Plato's Republic, where Plato says the ideal ruler would be an enlightened philosopher. And we get images of Marcus like that. For example, in the film Gladiator that came out in 2001, the character of Marcus Aurelius is portrayed as an elderly, beatific philosopher king. And certainly that portrayal of him has come down from the ancient sources to our day. He was regarded as a
Mhm.
beatific philosopher king in his own day. But the other major portrayal of him that also shows up today is that Marcus is a prig. He's a calloused killjoy. His stoicism makes him unfeeling and unpassionate and unemotional. There are hints of that in the meditations itself, but I see that as a misrepresentation. And that gets at what I didn't understand when I was a young man reading the work. That Marcus exhibits a passion, a religious fervor for the
Mhm.
doctrine he propounds in meditations. He is not cold and callous, but rather passionate. And his passion is all directed at being a good Stoic, at living in harmony with nature and performing just deeds that help his fellow humans. And so the more and more I read and translated the meditations, the more I came to respect the man, Marcus Aurelius himself.
He had so much humility, really, which you don't expect from an emperor, that he was constantly trying to improve himself. And he was constantly referencing not just the great Greek philosophers, the playwrights, everything that normal average man. I mean, the average man may not have been able to read and didn't read the philosophers, but he was able to see the plays or they were in the public discourse. So they would have related to that. And he related to people on so many different levels. He related to the elites. He related to the common man in many ways, which was extremely surprising considering his upbringing, where he would have been so isolated in so many ways. But part of that may have been the Stoic philosopher that he began with, Epictetus.
Epictetus, I think we'll say. That's the your close your pronunciation is closer to the Greek one, but in
Mhm.
English we usually just say Epictetus.
Thank you.
Uh,
I keep struggling with
no,
it.
Epictetus. That's very good.
But he was born a slave. He was Greek man born a slave,
Yes.
and yet he was so revered by this person who was destined to be an emperor that his whole philosophy is this is his first introduction to Stoicism, wasn't it? Through this
Yes.
philosopher.
Through that philosopher, he had a number of tutors when he was younger who introduced him at an early age to Stoic concepts. But I would say, yes, the Stoic philosopher who's most influential on him and whom he encountered, we know from book one, where Marcus says that one of his tutors lent him a copy of Epictetus's discourses. And so you're totally right. There is a slightly earlier Stoic philosopher named Aristo of Chios, rarely
Hmm.
mentioned, but we have a letter from Marcus written in his 20s where some scholars argue the letter reveals a religious conversion. Marcus is so moved to be reading the works of the Stoic Aristo of Chios. The writings make him aware of all of his shortcomings, and he's almost in despair that he will ever be a good person. And subsequently, Marcus is all in as a Stoic. And so, yes, some,
Hmm.
again, scholars are reluctant to call that a religious conversion, but I would just again point out that Marcus does exhibit a religious fervor for the philosophy he propounds. And so often Marcus is talked about just as a philosopher, but in a sense, because Stoic is a religion, as I see it, as well as a philosophy, Marcus is a preacher, and he gets sometimes in the pulpit. Sometimes he sounds like a fire and brimstone preacher, and that leads him in directions that aren't entirely consistent with Stoicism. Marcus sees himself as being obliged because of Stoic theory, first, to tolerate, if to at least tolerate, but also to go on and love and feel kindly towards all of his fellow humans, because they're in this pan-human ethical community.
Hmm.
It's called koinonia in Greek. I translate it as the human commonwealth. It's a
Hmm.
pan-human ethical community. We all belong to it, and we have duties to do just actions in that well, it's not even hypothetical for Marcus, in this ethical community. Other Stoics, such as Epictetus and the Roman Seneca, talk about us, in fact, as having dual citizenship in our home state, say the United States of America, and
Hmm.
in this koinonia, this larger human commonwealth. And the good deeds we do in the one also are good deeds that we do in the other. But Marcus goes even further in terms of liking people. There's another concept after the koinonia, or human commonwealth, called oikeosis, that comes from the Greek word for house,
Hmm.
oikos, like the yogurt. Oikeosis, houseification, and it means, yes, becoming so familiar and comfortable with people that they are like family members. And so Marcus sets up those ideals, but in the sections in which he's a fire and brimstone preacher, he is highly critical of his fellow humans. And so you can see him in some entries going back and forth. We're obliged to love and care for all human beings, but you're not going to listen to all of them, but only those who are Stoics and are trying to live the good life. And
Hmm.
so he bounces back and forth. And we do see him. You mentioned ancient Greek drama. You mentioned in your earlier question, there is one entry where Marcus praises obscene old comedy. It's obscene and insulting of public figures. He praises it to the skies, and he says that it helps warn people against arrogance. And then he
Hmm.
also says that Greek tragedy, another form of drama, he mentions the play, famously Oedipus the King by Sophocles, perhaps the most famous tragedy, when Oedipus realizes that his life is ruined. He realizes that he's slept with his mother and killed his father, and he gouges his eyes out and cries out to the mountain on which he was abandoned, "O Kithyron!" And Marcus says that ancient Greek tragedy, with the horrible things that happen in them, they're tragedies, they teach us what can happen in real life, and that
Hmm.
in the same way as we find those horrible things enjoyable in a play, right? We should also appreciate them as not bad things in the world. And that brings us to another major conception. I'm really going off now.
No,
This
great. I
is what's
love it.
hard for me in Stoicism, something that I can't do. But Marcus says we need to accept absolutely everything that happens for us in our lives. Or
Hmm.
tornado destroying our house, not getting a job we really wanted. All of those perceived misfortunes aren't bad at all because they've come to us out of this perfect system, nature, which does no harm. And so, yes, in some ways, meditations was helpful for me. There was a job I applied for that I didn't get, an academic job. And Marcus is right in that now, in retrospect, after reading the meditations, I don't see that as a bad thing, not getting that job. I don't see that as a misfortune. I'm
Hmm.
grateful because I wanted to be more of a writer than an academic. And now I'm a full-time writer, for
Wow.
richer and for poorer.
Yes, all these things, the positive and the negative, can move us on in life the way we're supposed to be going, is according to him. And as much as he did get a little bombastic at times, he was also saying, when you come across these people who are not as worthy or who have the bad ideas you want to ignore, try to educate them through your example. Try to show them what they're supposed to be doing. And this brings me to another question. You were talking about the difference between um, the savage, who is, just forget him. He's not really even part of this community, the Commonwealth, but the evildoer who can be redeemed. He should be welcomed back in. He should be forgiven whatever sins he has committed, however horrible. So how did he see the difference between the savage and the redeemable bad guy?
Got it. And so the word Marcus uses for savage in Greek, since we're doing Greek words today, is apanthropos. Anthropos means human being, and apo at the beginning means away. And so these people are no longer anthropoi, no longer humans. And they're even worse. There's another Greek category, the barbaroi, which just means non-Greek, but not necessarily a savage. They're even worse, these apanthropoi. And so
Mhm.
they're outside of the human commonwealth, and they don't don't understand or respect any of the things that bind humans together, right? And but then we move on, yes, to a recurring character. I'm glad you picked that out. We'll just
Mm.
call him the wrongdoer, right? The person
Mhm.
who does wrong. That person has convinced himself that he is doing the right thing. That Marcus argues, and this is a philosophy he got from Plato and Socrates, right? He argues, it takes some time to wrap your mind around it, but I think I understand it. He argues that people only ever do wrong unintentionally, right? And I
Okay.
can think about it this way: like you can knock over a 7-Eleven because you want the money out of the till, right? You need
Mhm.
money really bad. If you're going to do that, you say to yourself, you don't say to yourself, knocking over a 7-Eleven's the wrong thing for me to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. You convince yourself that it's the right thing to do. And that also, this issue takes us to darker territory. You can think
Mm.
of, for example, my God, the Holocaust during World War II. The Nazi guards at the concentration camps, they didn't say to themselves, I'm going to kill 1,000 people today because it's the wrong thing to do. They convinced themselves, or had been convinced, that killing those people was the right thing to do. And so I think I buy that. But Marcus goes on to say that wrongdoers only ever harm themselves, right? A person can
Mm.
punch you and beat you and destroy your body, but as Marcus sees it, that physical thing, your body, is an object of indifference, right? It's of no more interest to you than any random thing out there in the universe. And so, even as the wrongdoers are hacking and doing hacking at our flesh and doing wrong, Marcus says your mind should remain serene. And that is a high ideal indeed.
My.
And so, because the standards for being a perfected Stoic, for doing Stoicism right, are so high, I see it as making the meditations very dynamic. Marcus is constantly trying to reach that ideal, constantly falling short. And so, his journey towards it, he may have reached it in the last entry, I'm not sure, but his journey towards this perfection is very human. He is fallible like all of us. And there's a particular voice. There are three voices in the meditations. There's the bossy
Mhm.
instructor voice, the whiny objector voice, but the one that's most human is the aspirant's voice, the guy who's striving. He writes in an I, like in a diary, the guy who's striving to be a perfected Stoic. In Stoicism, there's a word for that character, the guy who's aspiring, the aspirant. In Greek, it's prokopton. Kopton
Mm.
means to hack or slash, and pro means forward. And so it's like the Stoic aspirant is in the jungle with a machete, hacking
Yeah.
his way through the jungle growth towards some goal.
So it's sort of like we're going on this journey with him as he's trying to elevate himself. So that is, I think the aspirant is the most relatable person who is striving for this, but not quite getting there. And there were times when the bully, I
Yeah.
was getting frustrated because I was like, Nick, what do you mean by that? So it was kind of funny then having the aspirant come in and sort of like level that playing field a little bit with, well, this is where we're trying to go and this is what's hard about it. It was kind of a at times a wild ride for me
Oh, good.
because I was getting so frustrated at times with it, because I was going along saying, yes, this is very good. This is, I appreciate this. And wait a minute, wait a minute. But that's human nature too, is even when you are learning things you need to learn, you're pushing back at the same time because it's uncomfortable.
Yes. Oh, I like that. Yes. And so like the strictures of stoicism, it's like wearing a straight jacket in some ways, or
Mhm.
wearing a really stiff suit to a formal occasion like a wedding or a funeral. Yes, it does feel uncomfortable at first. All of these very high standards, my God. In some entries though, Marcus is forgiving of himself. He says if you've done even 4 or 5 things today, or if most of your actions have contributed to justice, then let yourself go. In some few occasions, he's less rigorous with himself. But you're right. I like you're describing the instructor as a bully. He is a
Mhm.
bossy know-it-all. He has all the answers.
That's and that in a way is sort of going counter to that whole being like he was going against as the bossy one. He was pushing back a little bit against stoicism because he was imposing these demands on himself. So I thought it was a really interesting kind of battle that he was having internally. And I can relate to that. We all believe that we should be doing better, and then we sit and we doom scroll for 3 hours instead of doing what we're supposed to be doing. I don't know what he'd have to say to people today, with the distractions that we're finding. And he was talking about focusing on what's best for the community, and that is what is focusing on what is best for you, and that is what is meant. I kept thinking of the force, that
Yeah,
this
that's great.
this cosmos, this everything is connected, and the energy is in everything and it's through us. Thought it was the force, but also God, as Christians, as some Christians see him now permeating everything, being a part of every single person, not the
Yeah, no,
savages.
they are no, he's cruel to them. They are
Yes.
excluded forever. I'm glad that you said we and us, meaning we readers, and that
Mhm.
you identified with Marcus as you were reading the meditations. That comes from a happy accident. I mean, the meditations is only the popular phenomenon it is because of an accident of grammar. Marcus, the instructor, addresses himself as a you. Right? And so the you in the
Mhm.
book refers to Marcus Aurelius himself. He's talking to himself, but that you is slippery, right? One
Mhm.
can't help but take that you, Marcus is referring to himself, as referring to oneself, right? That
Yeah.
you is what draws the reader in and takes him or her on a journey of self discovery. General scholarly consensus is that Marcus wrote this book for himself alone. And the reason is, I mean, he was emperor and he includes all kinds of unflattering details. Elsewhere, we have imperial autobiography, like the Emperor Augustus's Res Gestae, the account of his accomplished works, which is whitewashed public autobiography in which the emperor has no flaws.
Mhm.
Marcus has plenty of flaws in the meditation, and he lists them. He says he thinks he's intellectually slow. Even after all these brilliant theories he's presented, he feels
Mhm.
he's intellectually slow. He feels he's anger prone. He uses slang words for feces and semen. And so I am very confident that he did not intend it to be published, right? It would not have been an entirely flattering portrayal of him as emperor. But all those personality quirks that Marcus talks about, again, they make me love the work even more because he becomes human. As I mentioned in the introduction, I had a different feeling when I was translating the meditations. I felt like I was Marcus's shrink. I would sit down and listen to him talk about himself, and I felt I got to know him really well. So it was intimate, but not in a relationship sense, in a loving relationship sense, but yeah, as between therapist and patient sometimes.
And this was translated from the ancient Greek, which was still at the time the language of philosophy and science and literature. So he would have been educated in Greek as a child, even.
Yes, well, he would have started studying it from a very early age. Latin was his native language, but he chose to write his meditations in Greek for a number of reasons, some of which you've already mentioned. After the conquests of Alexander the Great, right, several hundred years before, the Mediterranean was Greekified, especially the
Mhm.
eastern half of it. And in Marcus's day, Latin was used for business transactions, legal transactions, all your day-to-day kinds of interactions. And Greek was still the predominant for philosophy and poetry and other kinds of literature. Also, Epictetus and all the Stoics who preceded Marcus, except for Seneca, wrote in Greek. And so they developed a technical vocabulary. And Marcus
Mhm.
saved himself the trouble of having to translate that terminology from Greek into Latin. And his Greek, I mean, I love the style. My book emphasizes that Marcus is a literary stylist as
Mm.
well as a philosopher. He's been treated in the past as a philosopher alone. And so I really tried to bring Marcus's merits as an artist to the surface in my translation.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I found that fascinating that you did see him as an artist in as he wrote each of these entries.
He uses a wide variety of techniques. He likes, for example, paradox. in which a sentence contradicts itself on purpose to hint at another meaning, right? He
Mhm.
says, for example, as a paradox, the destiny we are carrying inside of ourselves just keeps carrying us onward. And I was glad I was able to get that word play from the Greek into the English. In one sense, we're carrying our destiny around inside of us, right? But at the same time, that destiny is carrying us onward. And that would seem
Mhm.
at first to be a contradiction, but the more you think about it, it isn't, right? He
Mhm.
also uses another literary device I like called apostrophe. Apostrophe is an address to something that can't talk back, right? Like, oh, tree, get out of my way. That's an
Uh-huh.
apostrophe, right? And Marcus will apostrophize himself and various religious aspects or various aspects of Stoicism. He'll address nature in a prayer or address his soul. And when he does, it's very human. It's not, oh, soul, and then something lofty. He talks about his soul as if it's a wayward teenager, and he, the
Mhm.
instructor, is the parent nagging at it. You have no self-respect. And so, in addition to all the literary devices like paradox and apostrophe he uses, he certainly also uses distinctive character voices. And
Mhm.
sometimes he'll break the tone. He'll start with something very positive, right? And then suddenly turn it bad, right? Everything that happens is beautiful as the roses of spring, including death, disease, slander, betrayal, and the many things that trouble the ignorant. Good. And so he'll, yeah, pull the rug out in terms of tone and leave you hanging. And so, yes, I tried to get all of those literary devices up into the English and hopefully doing the work in English that they do in Greek.
It was really delightful. And I liked the language that you used because I've read so many translations of ancient Greek works where it's very pedantic and very, I don't know, almost looking down on. It's like we admire them, but at the same time, we're looking down on them. And this was very fresh and felt very, very now. I appreciate the time period that they were writing in and everything that surrounds it. But it's also nice to be able to read something that links me back to that time, but at the same time makes perfect sense to me right now, where I am
Got
right
it.
now.
Thank you very much for that compliment. Here's an analogy I hope will be interesting for what I tried to do in the translation. When you think of ancient Greek architecture, classical architecture, the most famous temple by far is the Parthenon atop
Mhm.
of the Acropolis, the whole Parthenon now. We see it in this gleaming white marble. It's formal, it's distant, it's aloof, right? And that's what we
Mhm.
think of when we think of the classical. In fact, in classical times, that Parthenon was painted gaudy colors, oranges and
Yes.
yellows and blues. And so
Hmm.
I see the translations that are cold of meditations that are cold and dispassionate as being like that marble, marmoreal,
Mm.
distant, aloof. Whereas what I tried to do was give you the Parthenon in living color instead. And
Yeah.
I hope it helped. Certainly, as I said before, Marcus has no reason to be formal in talking to himself because he has no expectation anyone else is going to see this work, right? It's only by
Hmm.
chance that it was preserved.
Yes, it seemed very private in some ways, and at times I felt like I had picked up his diary and was reading it, but appreciating it. Um, I was very fascinated with the way he jumped from voice to voice. As you said, sometimes within the same passage. And it seemed almost as if he was arguing with himself as he was writing it, like a thought came to him that he wanted to put down. And as he was writing it, something counter came up or something annoyed him even about what he was saying, that he took it off in a different direction. And that also is so very human and so very true of a private entry in a diary, where you're not trying to compose something that's all pat and wrapped up for somebody else to look at. You're sort of going all over the place, but at the same time, very articulately, very beautifully put together. I understood what he was saying, but it was sort of a private argument with himself at times.
I love those moments. I mean, there are sections in the meditations that are clearly polished and revised, right? Marcus spent a lot of time on them, getting them just right. But I also like very much the entries you picked up on, right? Where Marcus switches voice or contradicts himself, because I think in those entries, we can see the Emperor Marcus Aurelius's mind working in the moment. He's just in
Mhm.
those entries, there aren't that many of them, he's just jotting things down as they come to him. So we actually have a record, yes, of his mind working in the moment. Whereas, yes, other sections are polished, right,
Mhm.
as if intended for publication.
Right, or put on a t-shirt or something.
Yeah, yes. There is a website, the Daily Stoic, that is very popular, and
Mhm.
the guy who runs it has been posting translations, just sentences from my translation, and I'm very pleased with that because it shows how quotable, how sententious Marcus can be, and I tried to capture that, and it seems that it has caught on, and so I'm pleased to see those quotes at the Daily Stoic.
No, that's great. I mean, I have the book here. As you can see, I have marked all of the
Whoa.
ones that I said, oh, let's go back and take a look at this one again. And I hadn't, as I said, I'm disappointed I didn't get through the whole thing, but I felt the need to slow down because I was absorbing it. I didn't want to read it the way you read an article on the train. You're just trying to get the information, get through it. It was him expressing himself in ways that were supposed to be helpful to me, well, to him, but to me because I'm reading it. So I did slow down with it. I wanted to take my time and absorb it. I was trying to read it a couple in the morning and a couple at night, and that just kept putting me further behind. But as I said, I don't know what it's going to look like when I finish. That I'm going to keep going back to this. I kept to something similar when I was in college, to try to like inspire myself, and when I was having frustration to go back and you can tell that I was 18, 19 when I was writing it. So I had admired what he was doing because I became discouraged because after a while I was like, oh my God, I sound so sappy. This is ridiculous. And I stopped doing it. And I thought, here's someone who just kept at it and just got better and better at it. And what he was going through at the time of writing it were the wars against the Germanic tribes, yes?
Yes, it's called the Macromanic Wars. Um, Early on, they started in the late 160s AD, and Marcus had a co-emperor named Lucius Verus. It's the first time we had co-emperors in Rome, and Lucius Verus led the troops in the beginning of the war. Some sources say he was a drunk and was irresponsible, and the generals ran everything. But he died. And it may have been from what's known as the Antonine Plague. Scholars think it was smallpox that was ubiquitous everywhere in the
Oh my
emperor at the
gosh.
time. And so Marcus, for the last 10 years of his life, was mostly there on the northeastern frontier of the empire in what's Austria today. Yes, leading the troops in the Macromanic Wars. And eventually, the Romans won, and Marcus got a triumph, a celebration back in Rome. And so, yes, in that way, again, we find Marcus being a very good, a scrupulous and dutiful emperor. There he is leading
Mhm.
troops in battle when all he really wants to do is become a full and perfected Stoic.
And this is where we come to logos, which you didn't want to define. In Christianity, it's sort of the wisdom and the intelligence of God made manifest in Jesus. The understanding of logos at his time must have influenced Christian thought because it is so very similar.
Yes, I can try to define logos. I did choose to leave it untranslated. Literally, or most often, logos, when you encounter it in ancient Greek, means the word.
Mhm.
But in meditations, and this is why I chose not to translate it, it means something like rationality or logic. It is divine reason, divine
Mhm.
wisdom in us. And you're right. I also see the logos as contributing to what would be a very important concept later in philosophy, free will. I won't say the concept of free will is fully developed in the meditations, but the logos gives us that. Unlike the animals who don't have this portion of the logos in us, we are self-conscious. We can reflect on ourselves and we can make decisions decisions to be out of harmony with nature or in harmony with nature. It
Mhm.
helps when talking about this free will to talk about death. We all have to die. We're humans. And Marcus emphasizes that over and over again. But he
Mhm.
says because we are these reflective, rational creatures with choice, we can decide in some instances when we die, like Marcus chose on his deathbed to cut off food and liquids so that he would just pass away, right? And
Mhm.
so we can choose sometimes when we die, and we can choose how we die, well or badly. If someone is what, chopping us up or crucifying us, Marcus says that's just our bodies. We can choose to remain serene and not be concerned with the loss of this material thing. A high ideal indeed, right?
Yes.
Yes, if I were about to be executed, I would not be serene.
No.
But I am not enlightened. But I'm not enlightened either, right? And
Mhm.
Marcus, as far as I can tell from the few accounts we have of his death scene, did practice what he preached.
Wow.
He went out beatifically, ready to go.
He also impressed me by constantly referring to, oh, you're so interested. You're not interested in today. You're so interested in what people will be saying about you in the future. You're going to be dead, and all the people who are praising you are going to be dead too. They're all going to be gone.
Did that
It,
argument work for you? I think it works for me.
yeah,
The argument is, people are crazy about posthumous fame, right?
yeah.
Having their name live on. And it's partly because we don't want to die and we're scared of dying and we'd like to think that there's something of us that remains, right?
Mhm.
But Marcus, fame seeking, a major no-no in the meditations, right,
Yes.
recurs again and again and again. And it's bad for a bunch of reasons. One of them you mentioned, but it's bad also because fame seekers are focused on the future rather on the present moment. We never
Mhm.
inhabit the past, we never inhabit the future, we only ever inhabit the present. And these fame seekers are neglecting what they could be doing for the good of all people in the present moment. They're neglecting that to focus exclusively on themselves and on the future. And Marcus sees the future as being infinite, going on infinitely, right, into later time. And so he says, whatever little bit of posthumous fame we get, right, in contrast to the infinity of the future, it's nothing, right?
Mhm.
One twist of a hand drill, right? One breath, it's nothing. And so he does all that to get him to focus on the present moment and not to worry about his reputation. And it's one section where he's talking about the reputation where he actually reveals that he is emperor. He rarely mentions that he is emperor, right? But in
Mhm.
one scene, he says, no matter how good a person is, people will be at his deathbed wanting him to die because they're going to inherit something from him, right? And he says that's what a virtuous person would get. Think about how many more people want you dead. And the
Mhm.
implication is because you are emperor.
Mhm.
And so, though lots of people know who Marcus Aurelius is in Rome in the second century AD, and we're still talking about him 1,800 years later, in terms of the infinity of time in Marcus's mind, that's nothing, right?
Mhm.
Oh my goodness, I'm a writer and I would love to have my works remembered for at least 1,800 years. I'm jealous. And yet it was for him just an accident. It was an accident that meditations became this popular phenomenon.
Right. When you think of all of the very important people at that time, the very influential people at that time, we don't know who they are. Most of them, we don't know who they are. They've just
Yes, a lot of the
disappeared.
names, when I was writing the notes, I had to write scholarly notes in the back. And every time, yeah, again and again, I didn't like having to do it, but he would mention characters by name, and we have no idea who they are, or we've
Mm,
only encountered them as a name elsewhere. And so, yes, those are tantalizing and interesting moments. You're like, who is this person exactly, right?
right.
Sometimes, though, with the unidentified names, it's pretty clear from the context who they are. In
Mhm.
an entry I find amusing. This is in book one, where Marcus is. It's sort of like a drawn out acknowledgments section. He's thanking various people, or a drawn out dedication. He's thanking
Mhm.
various exemplary people in his life. In section 117, it comes out of nowhere. He says, that I never even touched Benedicta and Theodotus, and that when I did eventually succumb to an erotic urge, I was cured of all that thing at once. Marcus is a little weird about sex, but we're pretty sure that Benedicta and Theodotus that were attractive slaves in the imperial household. Wealthy Romans like to show off their attractive slaves, and since they owned those slaves, well, they could rape them. They could force those slaves to have sex with them. And Marcus is weird, and it's almost funny. He's grossed out about sex. That was one of the things I noticed as Marcus's shrink. And so he says, when I did eventually have sex, when I did eventually succumb to an erotic urge, gross, I was cured of all that sort of thing for good. He earlier in that entry, he says that he is grateful that he did not lose his virginity until even somewhat beyond the proper time. And that's interesting. So Marcus thinks sex is gross on the one hand, but this is remarkable. His wife, Faustina, gave birth to 14 children, two sets of twins, 14. And given the high mortality rate for infants in Roman times, only six of them survived. Five girls and one boy who would go on to be the horrible Emperor Commodus, who was eventually assassinated by his guards. He was so bad an emperor. And so Marcus again and again talks about losing one's children. And people and scholars have been critical of Marcus for being callous. He's trying to train himself out of dreading the loss of his children. But it was a very real stressor for him. And he repeats he's trying to get himself past, trying to get himself past worrying about the loss of his children. He does it again and again because it's an active issue for him. He tries very hard to say, see your child is ill, but don't think about losing that child. Don't report on it afterwards, right? He repeats that because it's something that's worrying in him, that's rankling in him, right?
Yeah.
And he says, keep a calm mind, even if the disease bites deep and your child has died. Keep a calm mind. Now, that is an ideal I would not. I don't have any children, but if I did, my God, losing one of them, I would never get over it. But Marcus says,
No.
don't ever get into it in the first place.
Which seems harsh, but at the same time, it's kind of heartbreaking. It's like he just wants to put his emotions in a box and not deal because he's had to over and over and over again. So let's just shut it down.
That's how I felt about meditations when I first read it, like keeping control. Marcus says, curbing yourself and carrying on, going on with your life. That's the advice. And I was a poet, and I am a poet, and I wanted big operatic emotions, and I was not going to put them in a box. But while I was translating meditation, there was still that issue, but I recognized other passions that Marcus has, right? I mentioned his religious fervor, for example, and he
Mhm.
says that the pleasure we take from doing just actions, doing actions that help people, the pleasure we take from that is a greater pleasure than what we get from sensual pleasure, from drinking wine or making out with somebody, or
Mm.
right? He says, I haven't been in that situation where I'm deriving pleasure from doing just, well, I think maybe I have been in that situation in which I get pleasure from doing the good thing, right? And,
Mhm.
but I still, yes, I confess, I find myself drawn to sensual pleasures, and Marcus Aurelius would disapprove. Certainly.
He would disapprove of most of us, I fear.
And that
Uh,
comes out, his indignation. And so he says he has to love them. He has to love them no matter what and really mean it. He's very sincere about it. And then we get all those sections in which he goes off on people. And it's almost as a genre of Latin literature called, well, Greek and Latin literature called satire, right? And there's a
mhm.
particularly savage Roman satirist named Juvenal.
Mhm.
Associated with him is this Latin phrase, saeva indignatio, savage indignation. And at times, these people Marcus should be loving. He tells himself to love them unconditionally. He is verbally savage towards them again. But that inconsistency, as I see it, makes him all the more human. He had the best intentions, and sometimes he lapsed, right? And that's kind of how Stoic philosophy is, right? When Marcus
Mhm.
talks about a perfected Stoic, he doesn't name anybody. He doesn't list anybody who attained that wisdom. They're hypothetical examples, right? He says the perfected Stoic would do this or do that, but he doesn't name any one perfected Stoic. And I don't know if it's possible to
Mhm.
sustain perfect harmony with nature at every moment.
I would think not.
I would
Yeah.
think not. Yes.
But that's where the struggles become interesting, where he's really yelling at himself and really like, please, but no, I'm trying. And
Good.
still,
I'm glad you see it as a drama. You caught
yeah.
you caught the drama of it. I came to think of it. I mentioned I felt like Marcus's shrink. I came to think of it as a particular niche of psychological theory called psychodrama. It sounds
Mm,
like something horrible, but it's not, right? It's a school of psychology that opened in the 1920s. It became very popular in the 60s and the 70s, in which patients are characters and act out situations in their lives. And also, more importantly for
mm,
me, they embody aspects of their mind, and there's a drama made between the dueling, the rival portions of your mind. And so,
mhm.
with those three predominant voices in the meditation, the aspirant and the instructor and the objector, I came to see the meditation as a whole psychodrama. It's dynamic. The
Mm.
characters are interacting with each other. And yes, I'm glad you got that with the voices saying this on the one hand, or the voice and another voice saying this on the other hand. I'm glad that the drama came through.
And that's why I appreciate the way that you wrote it in more contemporary terms, so that it wasn't sort of like lofty, as a lot of the Brits in the last 2 centuries, everything is so very elevated. This really brought out his humanity, which I don't think everyone is good at bringing out. I was pulled in by it because I am going through the same psychodrama that he's going through of
Oh,
pushing and pulling. So it
yes.
was sort of comforting and sort of listening to his wisdom because of what he had learned and what he was going through and trying to educate me, not on purpose because it was a private book, but educating me and improving me so that I could continue to become a better part of the Commonwealth of the cosmos, which is all one, the
I'm
force.
glad that my translation connected. Yes, I
Mm,
avoided the these and thous. There are
thank you.
after 50 years, a translation goes into the public domain. And so the translations of meditations in the public domain are older, and they tend to be stiff and formal and use thee and thou just because it's classical literature, right? But as
Yeah.
I said, Marcus is writing for himself. He doesn't expect anyone else will see it. He has no reason for thee and thou when addressing himself. It's intimate
Mm.
and familiar. And so, yes, I'm glad that that worked for you. That was one of the main things I was trying to do with the translation.
I don't want to just say as a self-improvement thing, but as something, I think we're going through something as an entire nation now where we are, maybe entire planet, where we are trying to find the good in things and we're trying to be a piece of that, a part of that. And what do we do and how do we do that? And it's all doom scrolling and hysteria and oh my God. And this is very grounding because he's talking about going through all this trauma on different levels as a family man, as an emperor, as just a member of society. And these are the ways that he's finding to walk his way through it and try to make himself better and try to make society at large better going into the future. He really is a very wise man. I'm not impressed with most emperors and their thought patterns because
He
they are
does leave
so
you with
full
that
of
impression.
hubris.
I totally agree. I came to respect him more and more the
Mm,
more I translated him, and he is regarded as yes one of the best emperors. I see the meditations in some ways. You're talking about its relevance for today. I see the meditations as in one way being even more relevant today than it was in Marcus's day, and that has to do with recognizing distractions. For Marcus, the whole focus in Stoicism is on doing just deeds, deeds that help people in the human commonwealth and in our home state, right?
Hmm.
And in order to do that, everything else is a distraction. Every material thing. He even in book two calls books distractions. We should be independent of those when we are meditating as well. And there are even more distractions in our world today than
Oh
there
my
were in the
gosh.
Roman period. We have our cell phones that are beeping every time. We have random emails coming in, all kinds of annoying advertisements that sneak into our feeds and show up
Yes.
all around us. And so that's another way I think that another reason the book is so popular today is that it teaches us what's a distraction and what's not, and how to deal with those distractions, right? And we do that by by using our what's called our ruling power, hegemonikon, which is that divine rationality in us. We use that, and we use a vetting process in our soul to decide what we're going to let affect us and what not, right? I am very far from being an enlightened Stoic in that way, in terms of vetting what I let in to
Yeah.
disturb me or not disturb me, right? And that's one way in which Marcus is way ahead of me. But yes, it gets
Hmm.
back to that radical acceptance of everything that happens in our lives, not seeing any of it as bad. I wish I could be there.
Oh my gosh. I just want to not rant all the time. So I was having
I'm with
help
you.
center me so that I'm not ranting about stuff that's going on. And it is true. I feel that in the last 10 years, I wonder why, my focus has been so scattered that I have not been the reader I used to be. And I discussed this with a couple of other writers that I had
Yeah.
on the show, that I appreciate so much volumes like this that are sort of reminding me in ways that as a teenager, I tried to do that for myself, reminding me the things that I need to let go of or not allow to upset my balance. I certainly appreciate it. You compared it to cognitive therapy.
Oh, yes. And so, yes, the most common kind of therapy used in America today by therapists is called cognitive behavioral therapy, known as CBT in short. And
Mhm.
the main thrust of cognitive behavioral therapy is reframing, internal reframing. You, inside of yourself, look at what has happened to you in a different way. And that takes away the emotional valence, the emotional resonance from it, and allows
Mhm.
you, yes, to get past it and be happy. And that is a core tenet of Stoicism as well, right? That, as I said, our happiness depends entirely on our own internal assessments. We're in control of it, and we need to assess popularly regarded as bad things that happen to us as being good. And we're supposed to be grateful for them, even the bad
Mm.
things, because they come out of this perfect system nature that does no harm and does no wrong.
Something else that I found that I related this whole situation to, I was talking with a friend recently, a Black American woman, about how I would be like a raging maniac if I were a Black person living in this country. I would think I would be a lunatic because of the constant barrage daily in every aspect of life. And yet, the normalcy with which people live their lives because they have to accept this is the way this person is going to behave, and I can't let it affect me because I'm just going to live my life. So that is to me that in practice, in order to function and live a life that's normal at all, an entire multiple communities of people within this country, just this country, have to accept horrible things happening to them or being directed at them. They have to just accept it and put it aside and move on so that they can have jobs and families and just live day to day without becoming a raving lunatic, which is what I would be, I think.
Yes, I mean, I'm happy that I mean my circumstances are such that I mean I'm pretty poor, but I'm not starving. And I'm so
Mm.
grateful for that. But yes, that radical acceptance. I mean, even if I don't buy the Stoic theory, I like it. I mean, because there's a pragmatic take on it, right? These things are going to happen to you. The bad things are going to happen to you, however you look at them. And so
Yeah.
you may as well accept them rather than be angry about them, just so that you can calmly go on with your life, right? And so,
Yeah.
I mean, that aspect of Marcus's philosophy sunk into me because I could take a pragmatic take on it, right? I
Hmm.
may as well accept everything that happens to me. It's better for me if I do, if I do.
Right.
Yes, and that relates to some other psychological theory called learned happiness. That we are unhappy, but there are ways you can train yourself to be happy, and that involves accepting the many things that happen to you in your life. And so that's another happy accident for the meditations, right? That it interacts with and reinforces so many popular, so many used techniques in psychology, right?
Hmm.
Psychodrama, CBT, and yes, other kinds of psychology. And so that's another reason it's just an accident that this work Marcus wrote became so incredibly popular. Over 100,000 copies of it sold in 2019.
Wow. Yeah, because we can still relate to it. We can still understand what it is that he's talking about. And it did kind of feel like therapy at times. I was being constantly reminded, settle down. This is not the way to handle this situation. You're not helping yourself, you're not helping anybody else. You have to accept it. You have to accept this situation and then deal. So it was, and yet at other times he was like my mother yelling at me, why aren't you doing it this way? Because you should be
Right.
doing it this way.
I'll mention there's a funny anecdote it involves Marcus's mother Domitia. We don't have a lot of biographical information about Marcus, but this anecdote has come down to us. Marcus's mother Domitia was immensely wealthy. Her family owned a brick factory that made bricks for the Pantheon in Rome as well as
Oh,
the
wow.
Colosseum. And Marcus
Mhm.
inherited that bricks work when his mother passed away. But when Marcus was 13, and I love the age, right? That's early adolescence, the time for early adolescent hero worship. The young Marcus Aurelius at 13 insisted on wearing the clothing of a traditional Greek philosopher. That means just an animal hide cloak. And he insisted on sleeping on the ground, on the dirt. And when his mother, Domitia, who's very wealthy, caught him sleeping on the ground, they compromised. They agreed he could use an animal hide blanket so long as he slept on a couch, right? And this compromising haunts Marcus for his whole life, right? There's his
Mm.
desire to be a philosopher on the one side, and then there are family and imperial or dynastic obligations on the other
Mm.
side. And he was torn between them his entire life. Whereas I would have just said, screw you. I'm not going to do anything practical. I'm just going to be a philosopher. My dad was a philosopher, and so there was no pressure put on me to do anything practical. And so here I am, a poet, right? But
Yeah.
Marcus was nobler than I am. He did the good thing for the emperor. He became a great emperor and helped, yes, and was beneficial on the whole, more beneficial than detrimental. And so another reason to admire him, right, that he, in a sense, half gave up on his great hope in order to fulfill his duties.
But does that not also make him a good Stoic, that he was in the situation that he was in and he had
Oh,
to
yes.
make the best of it?
Like his whole life is a stoic situation, right? In
Mm.
which there was his desire on the one hand and there is his duty on the other. And he did what he had to do in terms of his career, just as he did what he had to do in terms of stoicism. I like that. Marcus's
Yeah.
the whole split in his life
Mm.
as a sort of summary of, yes, stoic views. Wow, that's very good. Thank you. I'm going to
Huh.
use that.
Oh, good. But this is where his frustration was, is that he felt he wasn't fulfilling, but at the same time he was fulfilling it. It's sort of a conundrum that he wanted what he wanted, and yet he was fulfilling his ideal by being who he was, who he had to be, who the cosmos decided he was meant to be. Wow.
Yes. I mean, it's almost, I mean, close to a unique situation where we have a leader from the classical world, right? Say a Roman Empire or a Greek king or a tyrant. And this person at the same time, yes, is a serious philosopher, a serious thinker. It's a unique situation. Marcus, again, we mentioned his humility as an emperor. It's remarkable. He criticizes previous emperors, which is very surprising. Emperor Tiberius, who was given to sensory indulgence in his retreat at Capri. Marcus also criticizes Nero, who was famously insane and is accused of burning half of Rome down. And he criticizes emperors, even though he's an emperor, and he also praises heroes who stood up against earlier Roman kings, right? Such as Cato of Utica, who killed himself rather than submit to Julius Caesar, or Brutus, one of the assassins of Julius Caesar, who eventually was defeated by, yes, pro-Caesar forces and committed suicide. That's another theme in the meditations, and it's hard to talk about. I'll confess, I've given a fair amount of talks about the book, but the theme of suicide is interesting. Stoics, in general, they agree that suicide is acceptable in certain situations. This is what CEOs like about the meditations. Marcus talks about obstacles as vehicles for innovation, right? You find that you're obstructed on your path. Well, you go around it, and in going around it, you come up with a better path, right? And when you
Mhm.
recognize obstacles, your view better gels with what's actually going on. Marcus is remarkable in that way. Sidetracked for a second, right?
No, that's okay.
Obstacles, yes, are opportunities to innovate. But he does say, in terms of suicide, that if there are only obstacles, if you can't make any headway towards helping other people, then you should kill yourself. And he talks about it in like 5 different sections. He says, when you kill yourself, even if it's out of, well, after you've been shut out and can't get any further ahead, he says you should still be grateful for everything that happened, even the obstacles. And he says if you
Mhm.
then commit suicide when you can't make any forward movement, right? He says you will have done at least one thing right in your life by dying in the right way.
The CEOs are not picking up on that part.
No, they like the innovation. They like the innovation stuff.
Not the be responsible to the entirety of the Commonwealth. How much did his caring about the entirety of the Commonwealth affect his rules, how he treated, because it sounds like he was saying, treat your servants well, treat
Yes.
everybody around you well, which I would think would then work into the major policies of the empire, that you are treating your people well, that you're making sure that they're okay. But I don't
Yes,
know
and
enough about him to know
he
that.
he is most optimistic, yeah, what most sympathetic and most human in those sections when he says, think about how you have treated other people, and he includes his slaves. And slaves, again, they were like slaves in American history. They were absolutely owned. They had no rights whatsoever. But
Right.
Marcus urging himself, yes, to be kindly, to do practice oikeiosis, identification, even with the slaves in his household, is very forward thinking. Marcus, on the whole, has little to say about women. In the first book, he gives one little sentence to his wife Faustina, who bore 14 children of him for him. He gives one little section to his wife Domitia, but elsewhere, Marcus seems to be critical of females. He says men who are involved in sensual indulgence are men women. He calls them men women, and so the implication is they're homosexuals. And Marcus is
Mhm.
definitely down on homosexuals, but he's remarkable in being forward thinking about treating your slaves well. A couple generations before Marcus, there is a Stoic philosopher named Musonius. Few people study him, but we have discourses from Musonius, and the third and the fourth of them are amazing. He argues that females are exactly the same as males in terms of
Oh,
studying philosophy, in terms of thinking, and so Musonius thinks philosophical Stoic training is good for everyone, and he says explicitly that females have the same capacities as males. He was, yes, amazingly forward thinking for his time. Marcus doesn't go that way. Marcus is uncomfortable with sex, as I said, and he seems to be dismissive of females. He's not nasty about them. He doesn't go on misogynist rants, right? But the,
mhm.
the the few number of times he mentions them kind of tells a story. He's traditionally chauvinistic, as Roman culture was.
Yeah, I see women winding up in those lists of people that you're talking about are not quite up to par. Like you can pick up homosexuals, you can pick up people who are lazy or people who are not, they all sort of fall into the same category when he's criticizing the people who are not quite worthy or not providing enough to the Commonwealth, that
And
these are
he
not
does it a
people.
lot. And you,
Yeah.
like you said, like you like to rant. Yes, Marcus has his rants against all the kinds of people he doesn't like, right? And he
Mhm.
resorts on stock types and stereotypes. I mean, I have to admit this, right? Stereotypes, for example, about females, that they are run by their emotions and they don't have any
Mhm.
rational control over their emotions. That old awful stereotype, right?
Yeah.
He does resort to that. And then, yes, it's interesting. Um, Ancient Greek culture, at many places and at many times, embraced male homosexuality. The pattern makes us uncomfortable, and that the pattern for Greeks generally is an adult male who pursues a pre-adult male, a boy basically, or an adolescent. It makes us uncomfortable, and it should. I mean, I study gender study. I work on gender studies and Greek lit, and I understand there are different conceptions of what's attractive and how sex works. But Marcus is very down on male homosexuality. He doesn't mention lesbianism, but he's very down on male homosexuality. And that's interesting because the emperor who chose him to be the Emperor Antoninus Pius's adopted son, Hadrian, famously had a public fling, a homosexual relationship with a boy from the east, from Bithynia, named Antinous. Hadrian had pictures of this beautiful, statues of this beautiful boy, put up all around the empire, and he even had him proclaimed a god on his death. This boy
Oh
that
my
Hadrian
gosh.
loved. Marcus never mentions Hadrian in that first dedication section. And so it seems that's one reason, that one way Marcus was critical of a previous emperor, Hadrian. But the
Hmm.
emperor who immediately preceded Marcus, Antoninus Pius, Marcus has nothing but praise for him.
Wow. And I'm assuming he says nothing about lesbianism because they just fall into the woman category. So done and
They do.
dusted.
Greeks and Romans, I'll be a little explicit here, they constructed sex in terms of penetration. That is, in every construction they had of sex, there was a penis involved, right?
Hmm.
And that's how they understood it. And so Roman males, at least the evidence suggests, didn't even recognize lesbianism as a distinct kind of sexuality. They didn't think of it as sex because there was no penetration involved. There's no penis involved. And so they
Hmm.
just leave it out of their reckonings of sexual types. I guess I'm up on this because long ago I translated for Penguin Classics the poetry of Sappho, Sappho of
Yes.
Lesbos, who is sort
Hmm.
of the OG lesbian, the original
Hmm.
lesbian from Lesbos. And so certainly her work, yes, could not be more different. Her emphasis on femininity could not be more different from what we find in the Meditations.
You've done quite a few um, translations that really fascinated me. You Aratus phenomena. I just sent for my copy. I was like, oh my gosh, it's because any older translations, I'm not interested, but I'm interested to see what you've done with it. Um, and you've done so many, Jason and the Argonauts, Aeschylus, Aristophanes, Euripides. When did you first start studying ancient Greek?
Um, I started when I was a sophomore in college. When I was 18, I had a religious experience. How I think about it. I was looking at in a humanities textbook at the opening of Virgil's Aeneid in Latin. Armo virum quecano Troiae primus laboris. I didn't know Latin, but the sky became brighter and the grass became greener, and I
Mm,
knew, oh, I'm supposed to be a poet and I'm supposed to learn ancient Greek and Latin. And
mhm.
so I started studying that, yes, in undergraduate school. And the translations just came about by accident. Because I wanted to be a writer and I thought of myself as a poet, I used the translations at first as craft exercises. And
Mm.
so I would learn from them. I'd learn techniques and I'd learn voices. I'd be able to take the voices pieces from these great works and use them in my original work. And so eventually it became a sort of half of my career, my translation work. And I generally always have one I'm working on. I think I'm done now, though. I think I'm going to focus exclusively on my own poetry now. Perhaps I've learned everything I'm going to learn from translation. We'll see. You wouldn't have to push me very hard to get me to do a new one.
No, because these are amazing works, but I'm really interested to see your take on the translations as opposed to the ones that I've already read. And you've won quite a lot of awards for your poetry, and you were working on Four Walks in Central Park at the same time as you were working on the translation.
Yes. The Four Walks in Central Park started a little earlier. Both of those books. Four Walks in Central Park is an immersive tour of Central Park in poetry in four walks. That came out of my difficult time when I had a drug addiction during COVID. I came out of that through meditation, through Shinyin Roku, which is Japanese forest bathing. I did that
Hmm.
in Central Park and got that book. And then the other kind of meditation that struck me was Stoic meditation. And so, yes, I was working on them both simultaneously. I finished the meditations a little later than Four Walks in Central Park.
But both healing experiences, which is nice that you then went and shared that with the rest of us who are trying to deal with our trauma of over many things.
Yes, I
Um,
feel like I've really emerged from something. Like there were a rough couple decades, a rough 20 years or so, but I
yeah.
feel as if I have emerged from a bad spot and I'm doing better now. And I am grateful, very grateful for Marcus for what he contributed.
I was able to read a couple of your poems online reunion show. I thought that was great.
Oh,
I
thank you
really,
very
I,
much.
I really enjoyed that. And Medea, the way you showed her humanity, of somebody who's so vilified as
Yes,
Medea.
Medea kills her children. She kills her children. And the trick is, yes, keeping her still a sympathetic and human character, even though she does that. Yes, oh my God, unimaginable act. Yes, she's a feminist icon and an interesting one, very much.
Yes, because she has her faults and the things that you would never want of her, but what she suffered, and how she suffered, why she suffered, is never really given a lot of focus. It is always what she did to everybody else and not what was done to her. So that I really enjoyed that. So it made me curious to go further into your poetry. And last year, you won I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Anahid Literary Prize from Columbia University's Armenia Center.
Yes, and we actually the award ceremony was just about 2 weeks for that, and so I gave a reading there. That was a complete surprise, but I was very honored. Oh my goodness, I confess I
Mhm.
love recognition for my work. That was a delightful experience reading at that podium, and the audience was really good. Yes, we'll see if I do translations again in the future. As I said, I think I'm going to try to focus on my own poetry now. I'm old enough. I'm all growed up. It's it's
Marcus
time.
helped.
Yeah, and Marcus helped. Yeah, he was yes, like an uncle figure, avuncular. His advice was very useful.
It was wow. Do you have any favorite passages?
Yes, this is where I find Marcus most original in terms of his stoicism, in terms of his aesthetic theory. Aesthetics in philosophy has to do with theories of beauty. And so, because everything comes from nature, Marcus pushes himself to see everything as beautiful. And so, in this section, he talks about non traditional beauty, or as I call it, this is his theory of strange beauty. I'll read just a few sentences from it. Section 3.2. One has to be on the lookout for exceptional sights that, though inadvertent byproducts of nature, still have their own appeal and charm. And then we get the bread baking analogy. When bread is being baked, for example, cracks form in the crust, and
Mhm.
they, though faults, one could say, in the baker's art, look strangely perfect and excite our appetite in a special way. He goes on to describe the furrows on a lion's brow and slobber dribbling from a boar's mouth as
Mhm.
examples of strange beauty. Good. So things that nature did not intend to be beautiful, but they end up being beautiful on their own, because nature made them. And I ended up seeing Marcus's prose, his ancient Greek prose, as a strange beauty, right? It's not beautiful in the sense that it's polished and immaculate, right? But it's beautiful in that it has these very human and what? Inharmonious moments. It has jarring moments, it has harmonious moments, right? It's beautiful for the reasons that other people sometimes call it homely, his prose style. And so I
Mm.
tried to apply Marcus's own theory of strange beauty to the translation, yes, to his Greek.
Which is actually perfect because if it's appealing to you, if it's pulling you in, if it's you're paying attention to what he's saying, there's the beauty in it. No matter how he's presenting himself, he's not going into the ancient poetry format, but he's touching me. He's obviously touching a lot of people because the books are still selling. People are still picking up on it. So that's the beauty, isn't it? That he's reached so many people with his ideals, with his stoicism, with his struggle to reach perfection. How many people has he touched, even though he says posterity means nothing?
Yes, I
It's meant
love that
something to
verb
us.
reach. I love that verb reach that you're doing. One of
Mm.
my favorite novelists, E.M. Forrester, his principle was only connect. As a writer, only connect. And I admire that very much. And I'm glad that Marcus has connected with you, right? I mean, the work is set up to do that, but I'm glad my translation didn't get in the way and let him reach out and connect
Mm.
with you. Yes. And that is
Absolutely.
very much what I'm after in everything I write, right? I also I think the reader is just waiting for the slightest chance to close the book and never look at it again. And so I try never to give the reader that opportunity, right? Never to give the reader an opportunity to say nah and close the book forever. I try to make it all delight. I try to make it all connect. And yes, I hope I have here and there been successful.
I think absolutely. And I'll tell you, I spent a tremendous amount of time. I reread the notes because there was so much background information that helped me to view it in different ways. I could read it through myself and get what I was going to get out of it. But then reading his history, where he was coming from, his education, that contributed as I was reading passages, because I started first with reading parts of book one, and then I went back because I love introductions. I want to know what's going on. And that then made me look at it a little bit differently. I got as far as book seven. As I'm moving my way through, I feel like I've got such a better sense of who he is, not just who he was, but who he is, and how what he's saying is affecting me and why it should affect me. So
I'm glad.
that
Did you read flipping back from the text to the notes? I'm glad you found the notes. Norton is using what's called the quiet page technique, and so there's no asterisk on the page indicating there's a note. But there are lots of notes, lots of details. Were you flipping back and forth? Did you start at the very beginning? There are different ways of approaching the meditation. Some people just go for 5 minutes a day and read two entries. Some people start at the beginning and read all the way to the end, and both are fine. But generally, people who are in it for the self-help, they go for a couple short reflective sections per day.
I did both. I think book one, I read almost the entire thing. And that's where he's quoting many different philosophers and, saying this is what this person brought, this is what that person brought. And I read it again a couple at a time
Oh, got it,
to
got
absorb it better. I have ADHD, so I'm either going to like run through something and read the entire thing, or I'm going to try to control myself so that I can try
it.
to
I
absorb
understand.
whatever I can out of it. So I went back and I reread the notes because as I was reading some of the entries, I was like, okay, am I understanding that perspective? And then I went back to look at the notes again to see if my perspective changed by reading more about where he was coming from. And I love that you have the who's who at the back because I was familiar with many of the people he was referring to, but certainly not half of them.
Oh, I'm glad you found that.
And there's so many Alexanders that it's like, oh, yes, let's separate them. We all know who the great is, but let's keep everybody else straight. And it was very helpful because I'm not as familiar with the Roman philosophers, and there were a few historians in here and a few other important emperors. So it was very helpful when he was referring to somebody. Philosophy has always daunted me a bit because I think it's always been so dry as it's presented to us when it's translated. This was not dry. This was very approachable and at times entertaining. I laughed out loud
Good. That's
multiple
good.
times.
There are some sentences that are funny. I
Like
mentioned the
there,
ones that are funny about sex. Those are curious. Yes. Good.
just
Well, I'm so grateful that the book had, yeah, that effect on you. My goodness. That's all I wanted.
it was very enjoyable. So if somebody's trying to approach it through that love of history or love of philosophy or just self-improvement, it hits on all those levels because I'm also, as I'm going through these traumatic days in the United States, always grasping at something that's going to sort of help me get through to here's the news today. Okay, let's find a way to get through the day without a rant and just do what I need to do for me and for others. And um, that was like a breath of fresh air. This is ageless. This things he refers to back then. We're talking about second century
Yes, second century AD.
CE,
Yes.
and they're still applicable.
And it,
And
it helped you then to get away from, yes, wanting to rant about politics. I don't want to talk about politics, but I've had to cut myself off from the news because I get so worked up. And yeah, and Marcus, I guess, yeah, Marcus also is helpful in this way in pointing out that such things are distractions. You know, if anything big happens, I will find out. But also, I mean, it's just the whole way our news system is set up in America today, where the algorithm figures out your politics and then sends you clickbait stuff that's going to
yes,
agitate
exactly.
you. And I don't like that means of releasing news to people, right?
Yeah.
It's meant to make you rage. And so for psychological reasons, I've had to cut myself off from the news. I mean, maybe I'm being irresponsible. I'm kind of being a quietist and that I'm accepting there's nothing I can do about it. But all of that is better for my mental health. And so I guess I'll run with it. But yes, Marcus would say such things are distractions. You should be focused on what's present before you in the present moment and using that to do just deeds, right? Not
Right.
worrying about other things that other people have done elsewhere unless you have to.
Because I can't control them.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't control them, but I can control me and I can affect the greater good in my little small way in ways that'll push everything forward. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the translation. I love that I got a hard copy of the book. I appreciate that because I love a hard copy of a book. And I'll be this is on my bedside table so that I can try to read a little bit of wisdom, um, a couple of them a night. This is what I'm going for is a couple a night instead of reading through the whole book. Um, but I appreciate all the background you put into it so that I could have a better understanding of who he was, where he came from, and a better understanding of Stoic philosophy, which, hey, I'm Greek, I should know more about that. But as I said, it always seemed to me to be so dry, and I feel like I have a much better understanding of it. And I relate to it much more than I would have thought. That I never would have thought it would really was related to the Stoics. I thought they
Thank
were
you.
a little bit too rigid.
I
Um,
try to make sure nothing I write or translate is dry. Dry is the enemy, dry and
yes,
alienating.
it
Um,
really is.
And there are a lot of translations of classical works that are dry and alienating, right? There really are. You know, and they those most of the translations available when I was young were horrible, and that put even greater pressure on me to learn ancient Greek so that I could just learn it, read it in the original, right? And not have to do
Yes.
with a translation. Yeah, some translations are so crabbed and ambiguous that to understand what the English means, you have to turn to the Greek.
Yeah.
Yes, I tried not to make translations like those.
That's why I was going to ask you to translate the New Testament.
Oh, that would be fun. Wow. That
That
could
would be,
potentially get me into trouble, but that sounds exciting.
I would love it because when I have read translations of the Greek that are not King James, um, I can still get frustrated because of the dryness and because people don't seem to be grabbing the heart of the matter. So I immediately thought of you as I was reading through this and what you had translated before. And I thought that would be awesome.
Wow, to make my own translation of the Bible. Well,
Yes, as a scholarly activity. Yes, I think that would be fabulous. And then I think you should immediately let me know so that I can talk you into coming back and talking to us about it.
I will play around with that. Thank you. It would be fun. It would be fun.
It would. What's in the works now? What are you doing?
I have put together a collection of poems called The Sirens and the Silence. Just the very best of the poems I've written over the past 6 years. And I have an agent, and my agent is shopping that book around to different presses. I'm waiting to hear back.
Oh,
But mostly,
wow.
yes, I'm working on poetry. I write some slightly longer, like short story poems, and then short lyrics. And so a lot of me in front of a Word doc, rubbing words together, trying to
Ah,
start a fire. And sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Yes, and I don't know if I'll do another translation, but that New Testament idea is pretty good. I'll think about it.
okay. Maybe occasionally I'll just send you a little line and say, still thinking about it,
Mm,
because I would love it. Will you be posting more of your poetry on your website?
I will, and yes, the website's a couple years outdated. I need to update some things on it. But yes, just searching my name on Google, you'll get access to a lot of poems. Yeah, most of my poems are available in digital format online.
Okay. I'll be linking all of your contact information on the podcast notes so people can access that easily. I suggest that they do because a lot of fascinating stuff. Is there anything else that you wanted to plug while we're here?
No, I just mostly want to thank you. This is such a pleasant conversation. We really just
Thank you.
chilled out and talked. It was very
Yeah.
comfortable. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Oh, I enjoyed it very much too. I was so looking forward to meeting you after reading the notes. I was like, oh, I can't wait to talk to him. So I hope that in future you'll come back and talk to us again. I am going to be reading the book that I sent for Aratis book, The Phenomena.
Mm,
I
Lot
got
of
so excited. I got chills. I was like, oh my God.
an astronomical poem. It was the first translation I did when I was very young. Aratus is a Stoic as well, and he sees the stars. It's about recognizing constellations and the orderly movement of the stars as reflecting the orderly movement of nature. The
Wow.
Stoics use the stars a lot as an analogy for cosmic harmony.
Mm. Would I be able to get you to come back and talk to us again about another one of your works?
Anytime, anytime, Pamela.
Thank you so much, Aaron. You were just a joy. Many thanks to Aaron Poochigian for a wonderful conversation and for bringing Marcus Aurelius to life. Thanks for listening. Greek Like Me is a Stealth Greek production. See you next time. Yassas.